So up next is our concentrator. I just want to give Jeff a little, so Jeff, concentration, you get an opportunity to spend a half an hour telling us a bit more about your business. So you'll want to get on the concentration schedule. So for our concentrator today, we have Steve Coulter, man of the hour from Copper Electric. I wanted to save my testimony. I know that I've used him at our HOA and recommended him to our board, and it's really exciting to be able to recommend somebody of such high value, and he gets out there and does a great job. Last week, with this construction that I have going on here, they cut my electricity, and I called Steve, and he was going to have somebody out here in an hour. Fortunately, somebody else in the building actually took care of the problem, but Steve was right there, and the same day he bought gift certificates from me for his staff for Christmas. So just awesome business, and one of those kind of execs that you really like to do business with. A few things about Steve before we get started. He was born and raised here in San Diego. He graduated from Granite Hills High School. So for those of you that are familiar with Granite Hills, he started in the electrical trade the Monday after he graduated from high school. So he's been doing this for a little while. I'll let him tell you how old he is. He enjoys hiking, skateboarding, and spin class. I know he's a really active guy, and I appreciate that. During COVID, they were getting the majority of their exercises from walking and running downtown and in the stairwell and in the building and on their Peloton bike. So he's been keeping himself healthy. And I really appreciate that from an executive, because I know that that really trickles down into your business. It shows a really great role model for there. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Coulter from Copper Electric.
All right, thank you for that, Vicki. Let me see if I can share this up. All right, here we go. So again, thank you, Vicki. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a safe and happy new year. I'm Steve Coulter, President, CEO of Copper Electric. We specialize in residential remodels, additions, custom homes, commercial, industrial, and service. And the service is for residential and commercial. So we're a full service electrical contractor. I would like to start off by saying I'm very proud to be a member of the Executive Association, and I mention it quite often to friends and business associates. So I'm very, very happy to be part of this group. Feel free to ask questions along the way as well. Let's see. Copper Electric opened its doors in 1975. Copper Industrial Center was built in 1981, and we have called this home ever since. It's where I am now. We joined the Executives Association in 1994. Larry's sponsors were Don Teamsma Sr. and Dick Jackson. I was fortunate enough to start work for Larry in the year 2000 as an estimator and a project manager. I became president and CEO in January of 2015. To share a little how COVID has affected us. When the virus first started shutting things down, we lost a couple large contracts due to developers all of a sudden having a surplus of industrial lease space. That's a big portion of our large work is concrete tilt-up work. We were ready to start a couple get contracted on a couple buildings, and the developer decided to hold off because they were receiving a surplus of lease space they already had. So they decided to pump the brakes and see where COVID was going to take them on that. We also had a couple custom homes put on hold due to funding that was tied up in investments that no longer had the value that they had right into the beginning of COVID. And then we also had situations at the beginning of COVID where people and homeowners and businesses didn't want us in their homes or offices because we didn't know how to protect ourselves. So that was another challenge as well, is trying to figure out how to be in people's homes and businesses safely. Another challenge that we also had was remodels that were expected to be started. The homeowners decided to hold off because they had kids being homeschooled and they didn't want the disruption of a remodel going on in their home. So business for 2020 for us was down about 50%. On a positive note, we just received a contract a couple weeks ago of one of those buildings that was put on hold down in Otay Mesa. So 2021 is looking up for us. Let's see here. I'd like to start the presentation off with a couple home remodels we've been a part with fellow executive members. The first is the Handlers chose to give their home a facelift, and as you can see, it's very easy on the eyes. And that's their kitchen, same remodel. We are also in the middle of a remodel, as Duncan mentioned it earlier. I asked Duncan if the remodel was an upgrade to his doghouse when he's in trouble. He shared that his doghouse is in the barn. So that is part of the remodel. He made it a family affair. And there's drywall going on. I'm expecting we'll probably be out there soon to put the lights and plugs and switches in the walls. These are some photos of projects we worked on with Vanberg Construction. We're fortunate to do a lot of work with Vanberg Construction and Home Care Concierge. And this is another remodel that we did with them. This is a temporary stair that Vanberg built to perform a second floor remodel. It's just to show some of the ways that we need to get creative so we don't access their living space while we're doing a remodel. So in this case, Vanberg Construction built a stairwell to the roof, and we walked across the roof to get to the second floor remodel. That way we didn't have to disrupt anything on the first floor. This is an example of removing fluorescent lighting, strip lighting in kitchens and converting to recessed lighting. So just an example of converting there to recessed lighting. We use tape lighting quite a bit nowadays. Can fit in small spaces. So here's where we installed tape lighting in a wine rack on a wall. It's only about a 1/4 inch wide, 1/4 to a 1/2 inch wide. So it can be installed relatively anywhere. And here's an example of, there was no receptacles or switches in this wall, and just an example of how we can cut receptacles and switches in residential where they may be needed. Sometimes requires drywall repair. This is an apartment building with grouped meters that we did for Gil Cleakin. Had rusted out equipment, frayed wiring, glass fuses, and we removed all that and installed new equipment with minimal downtime. And here's a side-by-side view of before and after. This is some underground work we've done. It's a good example of how many utilities can get cramped up in one small space. In this case, there's gas, water, communications, and power all together. So that's a challenge to make sure nothing gets broke or hit, or all the other systems stay online while we're running the new conduits. And this is some underground work we installed at Tri-City Christian School. A lot of time and effort is planned to make sure the conduits don't cross where where they turn, different elevations, so other conduits can pass and continue on. This is underground work for a 4,000 amp service. Both ends are critical to line up properly. If they're off within an inch, SDG&E will not sign off on the project. So it's critical that everything lines up properly. These are 5-inch conduits here. So they're not easy to work with. They don't bend. And we tie them down heavily because when conduits are grouped up in this manner, they require slurry encasement. That's a concrete sand slurry. Can be chipped away, but it dries hard, close to concrete. And there's so much air in the conduit that the conduits will float as you're pouring the sand slurry. So it's important that we tie them down tightly. Otherwise, if they float, then you lost the job. You have to remove the slurry, dig back down, and put the conduit back in, re-slurry. So that's an important task for the sand slurry. Some more underground conduit work where panels and transformers are being fed underground. We're typically first to arrive on site and last to leave, running out the underground conduits, and then getting lights turned on, power on. This happens to be Stone Brewing up in Escondido. We built the brewery and the restaurant building that they very quickly grew out of. They built the packaging hall right next door. The brewery sends the finished product underground to the packaging hall next door to be bottled and canned. And here's a shot inside the building before equipment started getting moved in and equipment being installed and their tanks. The building started off with a 1600 amp 480 volt service, and they quickly outgrew power. So we added a 4000 amp service to fulfill their needs. So they have two separate services, and that's the underground, and then a finished product right next to it, showing the transformer and the switchgear. This is an example of concrete tilt-up work. First, the slab's poured, then the walls are formed and poured. After 20 to 30 days of curing, the walls are stood with a large crane. And then 1 or 2 days later, a building is standing, ready for a roof structure. When I was a field electrician, this was my favorite type of work. Tailor-Made Golf up in Carlsbad, that was a design build project for us about 20 years ago. We continue to work in the building for maintenance and remodels. Same with Sierra Aluminum up in Riverside in Fontana. We've had a relationship with them for about 30 years. We're regularly on site taking care of 7 large commercial and industrial buildings. And here's an example of some EMT conduit work. We pride ourselves on this work still. Not a lot of people still install work like this. To me, it's a form of art. I always loved installing it when I was in the field. And here's an open switchgear. This is what the switchgear looks like prior to installation of conduit wire and energizing. And then closed up and in use, meter set. Here's an example of installing a transformer high on a wall to free up floor space. A lot of commercial buildings we work on are served with 480 volt power, good for HVAC equipment and lighting. We transform the 480 volt to 120 volt to be used for lower voltage equipment and receptacle power. This is a panel and transformer at the old Buck Knives building here in El Cajon. It was Copper Electric's first large design build project at over $1 million contract over 40 years ago. We've been in and out of the building throughout the years, and we finished another large design build tenant improvement project a couple years ago. So they gutted the building and a new tenant moved in, and it's a building that just keeps on giving. We use different methods to pull large cable. This is individual reel rollers, and we'll put them in line and pull the wire. They roll right there on the rollers. And then we've also pulled in this manner where all the cables are on one reel. A semi pulls up and we pull directly from the reel on the semi. We use different methods to pull the cable. Sometimes we'll use a forklift and just pull directly up out of the conduit. And then we also have electric pullers that we can, mount either to the floor or to the conduit and pull in that manner. Here's an example where there's a pulley bolted to the ground if we have to turn a corner as we're pulling wire, and that makes it a little easier to feed the wire into the conduit. And here's a set of conduits that with the cable pulled, and we'll just crane the switchgear to install directly over top of the wire. It's easier to pull without the switchgear in place sometimes, so that's what we did in this case. We pulled the cable and then the gear will sit right on top. This is bar lighting we installed at Extraordinary Desserts downtown. We were also the electrical contractor for the new Extraordinary Desserts on 4th Avenue. Here's where they had a bunch of dimmer switches controlling all their dining room lighting, and they wanted that wall space, so we relocated all those existing dimmers, opened up the wall, relocated the dimmers, and here's a finished product of the dimmers. Safety is a big priority. Here's an example of fall protection equipment. This includes a body harness, a lanyard, and a fall brake, which slows and stops the fall in the event of an accident. And here's an example of the electrician working on the roof with the fall protection equipment. Here's an example of PPEs for the electrical industry. Typically includes a hard hat with a flash shield, rubber gloves with leather protectors, flame-resistant shirt, pants, boots, and a rubber mat to stand on. We discussed the task to be performed before we start for potential hazards that we can run into, and then we'll stop along the way as well and reevaluate where we're at. If we saw any safety concerns, or if things are going well, we'll talk about that as well. That same Buck Knives building, we were called out for an emergency. A water leak caused a small sinkhole. A large boulder fell in and was assumed it was being supported by the SDG&E primary feed to the transformer, which is 12,000 volts. So there was a pretty good scare. Ended up being a communications conduit feeding the building. So luckily there was disaster averted and the repair was made. Here's an example of competitors' work that we've been called out to clean up. And a shot of a Christmas party from a few years back. I really like this shot because it's over 200 years of electrical experience for Copper Electric. So Dean and I were high school sweethearts. Went to prom together. We graduated in 1989. We got married in 1994. And our son Trevor was born in 1996. Let's see, she's my best friend. We enjoy hiking, running, skateboarding, volunteering. Dean is an escrow officer and branch manager with Chicago Title Escrow in La Jolla. Amazingly, she had a record year during COVID-19, and she doesn't do refinances. These were all from sales. So she had an amazing year this year. One of our main volunteer passions is EP Save a Life. Friends of ours started this. They lost their son from sudden cardiac arrest about 10 years ago. He was a sophomore in high school. This is an electrical issue with the heart. not a plumbing issue. So we screen teens by performing EKGs and echocardiograms, and we find usually 1 in 100 with a heart anomaly or potential for sudden cardiac arrest. We'll typically screen 500 to 1,200 kids every couple of months at local high schools. Obviously, we haven't been doing that this past year due to COVID, but we're excited to get back. This is my son Trevor with Dina. He's 24 years old and a graduate of University of Portland. He majored in biology with minors in environmental science, environmental policy, and fine arts. He's also a big advocate of volunteering and giving back. He now works at TriLink Biotechnologies here in San Diego as a CRM software administrator. He's tried to explain it to me so many times and it just goes over my head every time. He rode his bike home from Portland to San Diego the summer between his freshman and sophomore year of college, a little over 1,000 miles, and it took about a month. So that's a big accomplishment. He still rides, I think he did 150 miles this last weekend. With friends. They called it a bike packing. So they camped from their bikes. And that's him on his bike pulling that's the shot from when he was a sophomore in college, pulling his trailer. That was his setup for riding back from Portland. This is a picture of us with Trevor's girlfriend, Natalie. They're also high school sweethearts. As I mentioned, Dina and I were, and then kind of rare, but both of our parents, mine and Dina's parents and Natalie's parents, are also all high school sweethearts. And this is my goddaughter, Olivia. She now lives in Washington, but when she's here, I enjoy all the time I can get. This is us enjoying a day at the zoo. And this is Dina's surrogate child, Mike Jones. He's a Greek tortoise and he's full grown. He's about the size of a Big Mac. This is a list of businesses with executives and associates over the past 12 months. And this is a list of businesses, business with companies that we've done within the Executives Association over the past 12 months. And this is payables and receivables that we've done within the Executives Association over the past 12 months. And that's the end of the slideshow. I'm going to go back to the first screen. Let's see if I can get that back up. Struggling to get that back up.
Steve, is it time for questions yet?
Time for questions, and then I also have a couple props as well. Breakers, you probably have heard a lot of about Zinsco breakers, Federal Pacific Electric breakers, old Pushmatic breakers. These are all old breakers that you hear a lot of. You hear a lot about from residential inspections, you know, when you buy or sell a home. Home inspectors, their recommendation is to replace the panels. For us, it's getting to that point now where it's time. I used to have the mindset of, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Challenge with these breakers, they have poor connections to the busing, so they don't make a really strong connection to the busing, which can cause arcing and overheating. Another challenge they have is they don't trip, so they'll continue to short out, sending power, and that's where fires start. So check your panels if you have Zinsco breakers, Federal Pacific Electric breakers, or old Pushmatic breakers. it's probably time to get those looked at, make sure that there's no heat problems. We have FLIR cameras that we can look at the panels and see if there's any overheating involved. And another thing that we replace a lot of, which I'm sure you guys recognize, GFI breakers, I'm sorry, GFCI receptacles. I know it's hard to tell on the camera, but the newer ones have tamper resistance, so a kid can't stick something metal into the prongs. There's a shield over both openings. The only way that you can push the plug into the receptacle is if they go in at the same time. If you try and go at an angle, they won't go in. So if you ever come across a tamper resistant receptacle and you can't push the plug in, more than likely it's just because you're not going straight in. Try it again, aim both prongs of the plug at the same time and it'll push right in. Ready for any questions?
I have a couple, Steve.
Okay.
So the first one is, did Robert tell you about the new execs tax on business earned through the execs?
No, he did not.
Yeah, maybe he'll tell you offline. I think you owe it.
Again, that was payables and receivables.
My second question is going back to the tortoise.
Yes, sir.
Does it taste like a Big Mac?
I think if Dina heard that, you and I would both be in trouble.
My sole goal for that question actually was to get you to smile. And now that your presentation is almost over, you can start breathing again. And please schedule me for when you're finished with my remodel. I would like to get rid of my, what is the name of those breakers? The ones begins with a Z or an S?
Zinsco.
Zinsco, yeah. I'd like to replace my entire panel because I have all that stuff.
Absolutely. We'd be happy to take care of it.
And a great presentation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
I have a question, Steve.
Yes, sir.
First than anything, the dedication for your business is really inspiring. I got to say that.
Oh,
Great
thank you.
And all those years that you've been working in this industry, have you ever been electrocuted?
Many times.
Yeah. What was the worst experience you had being electrocuted?
The worst would be with the 480 volt that I mentioned. A single leg of 480 volt is 277 volts. In commercial buildings, a lot of the lighting is run on 277 volts because it's more efficient. We can put more lights on one circuit. So it's cost effective. It's cheaper to install electrical with 277 volts, but it hurts and it's violent. And I happened to be up in a ceiling wiring lights, and we were trying to keep the rest of the lights on so people could work. So we were wiring the lights while they were hot, and I got bit by 277 volts. And the T-bar around us is grounded, so we're just covered in ground, and you get a hold of that 277. It contracts your hand so hard that it's just hard to let go. You mentally have to tell yourself, let go, or worse things are going to happen. So I had to consciously tell myself, you got to get off this or you're in trouble. And it's just it's a shaking.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Impressive.
many 120 volt bites, we do it all the time, installing receptacles, keep the power on. Those hurt, but 277 volt lighting circuit, that really hurts.
Be careful out there, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, Wade Brenner.
Hi, Wade.
Great presentation. You guys do some cool stuff, some cool work. How does a young person enter into the profession? What kind of training do they need, or what kind of training programs do you have to have? Because it seems like the world's going electric.
Absolutely. There's schools. I went to San Diego City College. I took the basic electricity course. I think now it's 4 years. I think when I took it, it was 2.5 years. There are other schools that teach electrical. We teach, obviously. We typically hire apprentices or electrical trainees, as they're called now. And we'll teach in the field, and then we direct them to go to San Diego City College, enroll in class, and we take care of all their schools and all their school fees and books. But there are other classes. ABC is a class. They offer a class that's a 4-year program. there's another one here in East County. I forget the name of it, but they're I think they're just a 6-month class. So it's more just giving you the theory behind the electricity, where the 4-year programs really get into nuts and bolts and teach how to bend conduit.
So Steve, this is Renee Van Heel. Great presentation.
Oh, thank you for that.
Beautiful family.
Thank you.
So is there a need for electricians? Are many of these kids coming into the trade?
Yes, there's definitely a need. Toward the end of 2019, we try to run, I would say, between 8 and 12 electricians. That's just a sweet spot for the size of company we are. We were pushing 20 electricians, and it was very difficult to find. It was very difficult to find skilled tradesmen. And that is part of the challenge right now, is the skilled tradesmen. You can find electricians, but not all of them are skilled.
So skilled meaning experience, where they actually know what they're doing, or what?
Yeah, that's exactly right. With schooling, good field, brought up in the field properly. I was brought up almost militaristic. The foreman that gave me the majority of my training, he was tough, but it made me a good electrician quick, because I didn't want to get in trouble anymore.
So would you rather get them where they have the knowledge and you can train them so they don't have bad habits? Or what's the best, what do you like to hire, I guess is my
I like to hire straight, fresh, because you can teach them the way you want it done. Just like anything else, there's multiple ways to install electrical, but when you can teach them your way and then also have them go to school so they're getting the theory behind it. Here's how we like to do it. They're also getting the idea from the theory behind it. So that is my favorite way, is to straight out of the gate, no experience at all.
Well, that's nice to know, because so many of us know these young kids that are just lost.
Absolutely.
They were sold a bill of goods to go to college when they really should have done a trade.
Sure.
Yeah. My kids are more tradesmen than 4-year college. They're not accountants, that's for sure. So
absolutely.
So that's good to know. And thank you for sharing that. So I'm sure we can help some kids steer them in a good direction. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we typically start, we have a material handler, takes care of the warehouse, scissor lifts, the vehicles. And we'll typically start before we have the trainee in the field. We'll typically start them in the warehouse, because they get to learn the parts, they get to learn the language behind everything. So that's typically where a new electrical trainee will start, is in our warehouse, being the material handler.
Also, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thing's crazy, but very good to see you. Good
Nice
job
to see you
today.
Hey, Steve, Ron.
Hi, Ron.
Hi. Hey, can you just give me a brief overview of what it entails to put an electric car charger into your garage? Is that a big deal? Yeah.
It's, the biggest thing is, do you have enough service? Car charging, as you probably know, you can start with just a standard plug-in car charger that might charge, 2 to 4 miles an hour. So, overnight you're only getting 16 to 20 miles charge out of, so you really need to get into the 30 amp or the 50 amp chargers to benefit from an overnight charge. So then you're looking back at, do you have enough service? If you only have a 100 amp service in your house, that the majority of it's electrical, then you're timing your car charging. We're putting a lot of car chargers in now. Most car charging is done overnight, so it's good timing, because you're really not using a whole lot of power in the house anyway. Cheaper rates, so you're better off to be charging at night anyway. And then it's breaker space would be next. We run into the panel being full, where we have to set a small sub panel. What we'll do there is remove a couple circuits from the existing panel, install a sub panel near the circuits that we relocated. Gives us the room to install the breaker to feed the new sub panel. And now as long as there's load available on the service, now we have breaker space to install the car charger.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I got one for you, Steve. I didn't hear anything about solar. Do you guys do solar or just a setup for them, or?
We do not do solar. Yeah, no solar, solar. It's a specialty trade. It's like getting into either smart home or communications. It's too specialized. So for us to get into solar, we would really need a solar division, somebody to manage it. It's its own little animal.
Absolutely it is, but I've noticed a lot of the solar people are using subs for the panel upgrades.
Absolutely, and we do service upgrades quite a bit.
All right.
Yeah,
Very good.
I'm guessing we probably do on average probably 4 a month on the service upgrades.
Wow, very good.
Steve, it's Duncan
Yes.
again.
Yes.
There's a very short time usually between the end of your presentation and the end of the meeting, and I want to make sure you take a minute to look at all the chat messages that came through while you were doing your presentation, because there's a lot of nice messages there for you.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, I see there's a little red number there, but I'll be sure to do so. Thank you for that.
Okay.
If there's any other questions, I'm muting here because they're drilling in my building. Anyone else have a question for Steve or a comment?